It is September 27th, 1529. Outside the walls of Vienna, the largest army in the world has arrived. 100,000 Ottoman soldiers, 300 cannons. The greatest military force ever assembled in the history of the Islamic world, led by the most successful sultan of the Ottoman Empire, a man who had never lost a siege in his life. Inside the walls, defending a city of barely 20,000 people with medieval walls that experts had already declared obsolete, a 70-year-old German count nobody outside Austria had ever heard of. His name was Niklas Graf Salm. The Sultan's name was Suleiman. History calls him Suleiman the Magnificent. He had taken Belgrade. He had taken Rhodes. He had destroyed the Hungarian army at Mohacs in 2 hours. He had never failed to take a city he besieged. What happened in the next 3 weeks would change the history of Europe forever, and almost nobody knows his name. 1529. The year Europe came closer to falling than at any point since the Mongols reached Vienna in 1241. The year an old man, a deteriorating wall, and an early winter stood between Suleiman the Magnificent and the heart of the continent. By the end of this video, you will understand why 1529 is not just the year the Ottomans failed to take Vienna. It is the year that determined whether Europe as we know it would survive at all. The vault is open. To understand 1529, you have to understand the trajectory Suleiman was on. He had become sultan in 1520 at the age of 26, young, ambitious, and already commanding the most powerful empire in the world. The Ottoman Empire at its peak stretched from Hungary to Arabia, from Algeria to Mesopotamia. It controlled the trade routes between East and West. Its army was the most disciplined, most technologically advanced, most experienced fighting force on earth. Its navy dominated the Mediterranean, and Suleiman personally led his campaigns, not from a distance, not from a throne, but at the front, directing operations himself. Belgrade fell in 1521. Rhodes, the island fortress of the Knights Hospitaller, considered one of the most impregnable fortifications in Christendom, fell in 1522 after a siege of 6 months. At Mohacs in 1526, the Hungarian army was destroyed in less than 2 hours. The Hungarian king, Louis II, died fleeing the battlefield. His horse threw him into a marsh, and he drowned in his own armor. Within days of Mohacs, Suleiman rode into Buda, the Hungarian capital, unopposed. Central Europe was open. Vienna was next. The question was not whether Suleiman would eventually take Vienna. The question was when. The answer in 1529 was now. Suleiman left Constantinople in May 1529 with the largest army he had ever assembled. The march alone was an extraordinary feat of logistics. 100,000 soldiers, cavalry, artillery, supply trains, crossing the Balkans in summer. The journey took months. The army arrived outside Vienna in late September. Already behind schedule because the spring had been unusually wet, the roads through the Balkans had turned to mud, and Suleiman had been forced to leave much of his heaviest siege artillery behind. The largest cannons, the ones that had shattered the walls of Belgrade and Rhodes, could not be transported quickly enough through the Balkan mud. Suleiman arrived at Vienna with lighter artillery than he had planned. That detail would matter enormously. Inside Vienna, the situation appeared catastrophic. Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, technically the man responsible for defending Central Europe, was in Spain dealing with other crises, completely absent from the theater of war. The city's walls were medieval, thin, in places crumbling. The civilian population had largely fled. Vienna was a city of empty streets and closed shutters when the Ottoman army appeared on the horizon. What Vienna had was approximately 16,000 soldiers, enough supplies for a short siege, and Niklas Graf Salm. Salm was 70 years old. He had spent his entire adult life fighting for the Habsburgs across multiple theaters of European warfare. He was not young, not glamorous, not famous outside military circles, but he was extraordinarily competent. In the weeks before Suleiman's arrival, Salm made a series of decisions that collectively saved the city. He demolished the suburbs outside the walls, denying the Ottomans any cover or prepared positions near the gates. He reinforced the weakest sections of the old medieval walls with earthen ramparts. Dirt absorbs cannon fire far better than stone. He organized the civilian population that remained into labor gangs to work continuously on the defenses. And he positioned his relatively small force with precision, concentrating his best troops at the points where the walls were most vulnerable. Suleiman arrived on September 27th and immediately began operations. Without his heaviest artillery, his approach had to rely more heavily on mining, tunneling beneath the walls and packing the tunnels with gunpowder to collapse the foundations from below. It was effective, but slow. The defenders, under Salm's direction, developed countermeasures. They placed drums of water on the ground to detect vibrations from Ottoman tunneling. They dug counter-tunnels to intercept the Ottoman miners underground. The siege became, in significant part, a battle fought entirely beneath the surface. Two armies tunneling toward each other in the dark, fighting by candlelight with picks and knives. Above ground, the Ottomans launched multiple assault attempts against the walls. Each was repulsed. The defenders, fighting from prepared positions, inflicted enormous casualties on Ottoman forces attempting to cross open ground toward the walls. October passed in this pattern: mining, countermining, assault, repulse, assault, repulse. Suleiman's army was larger and better equipped in most respects, but the defenders had walls, preparation, and a commander who knew exactly what he was doing. Then October 12th arrived. The Ottomans launched what was intended to be the decisive general assault, a coordinated attack using multiple breaches created by mining, hitting the walls at several points simultaneously. It was the most serious threat Vienna had faced. Several breaches were created. Ottoman soldiers entered the city at multiple points. The fighting in the breach sections was close and brutal. And then the assault failed. The defenders sealed the breaches, drove back the Ottoman forces, and held the walls. Suleiman had one more major assault on October 14th. It also failed. By October 15th, something had changed that no military planning could account for: the weather. The autumn of 1529 had already been unseasonably cold and wet. Now it turned decisively toward winter. Snow began to fall outside Vienna. The Ottoman army, designed and supplied for campaigning in spring and summer, not for winter siege warfare in Central Europe, was not equipped for this. Soldiers were dying of cold and disease faster than they were dying in assaults on the walls. Supply lines stretched over hundreds of miles of increasingly frozen Balkan roads were failing. The army that had marched confidently from Constantinople in May was now cold, wet, depleted, and far from home. On October 16, 1529, Suleiman gave the order to withdraw. The retreat was brutal. Ottoman forces burned their own camp before leaving. Prisoners who could not be transported were killed. The army that had arrived in September as the most powerful force in the world retreated through freezing Balkan autumn in disorder, harassed by Austrian and Hungarian cavalry the entire way home. Suleiman would campaign again. He was an extraordinarily capable ruler who would reign for another 37 years. But he never besieged Vienna again. The moment had passed. The window, the narrow window of Ottoman overextension and European desperation, and one old man's competence, had closed. Niklas Graf Salm was wounded during the siege. A cannon fragment struck him in the thigh. The wound never fully healed. He died in May 1530, 8 months after the siege ended from complications of that wound. He had saved Europe and died of it. He was buried in the Votivkirche in Vienna, a church built centuries later in the 1850s, specifically to honor him. His tomb is there today. Tourists walk past it without recognizing his name. Suleiman the Magnificent died in 1566 during a campaign in Hungary. Still campaigning at 71, still commanding his army in person, still the most formidable ruler in the world. He died in his tent before the battle was fought. His death was concealed from the army for 3 days so the campaign could be completed without panic. The most magnificent sultan in Ottoman history died alone in a tent in Hungary 40 years after Vienna, still trying. So, what is 1529? It is the year that exposes the difference between a trajectory and a destiny. Suleiman's trajectory said Vienna would fall. Every data point, Belgrade, Rhodes, Mohat, the most powerful army in the world, pointed toward Ottoman domination of Central Europe. But a trajectory is not a destiny. A trajectory can be interrupted by mud on a Balkan road that delays a siege by weeks. By a decision to leave heavy artillery behind rather than risk the supply lines. By an old man who knew how to absorb cannon fire with earthen ramparts. By a winter that arrived 2 weeks earlier than anyone expected. By any of a dozen small decisions and accidents and miscalculations that individually meant nothing and collectively determined the history of a continent. 1529, the year the trajectory of Ottoman expansion met the wall it could not break. Not because the wall was stronger, but because the wall held just long enough for winter to do what armies could not. Niklas Graf Salm held Vienna for 3 weeks with 16,000 men against 100,000. He died 8 months later of his wound, largely unknown outside Austria. The man who may have saved European civilization as we know it is buried in a church in Vienna that most tourists walk past without going inside. History does not always give its heroes the recognition they deserve. Sometimes it gives them a tomb in a church that nobody visits, and the simple fact, pressed into stone like a carving in a cave, that they were there when it mattered. If this story made you think, leave a comment. Could Suleiman have taken Vienna if the weather had held? Was 1529 a turning point or just a delay? Subscribe to the Vault of Numbers. Every week, one number, one story history, forgot to tell you. The next number in the vault? 480. A king took 300 men to a narrow mountain pass. He knew they would not come back. He went anyway. The vault remains open.